Well, good evening. How's everybody doing tonight? I'm glad to see you guys. This time last week, I had just been told by the doctor that I had to stay away from people for 5 days. So, it's nice to be back. I understand Don did a good job. He only had 2 hours of preparation time. Now, I will cough from time to time tonight, and that's really not due to any sickness I had. I have a vocal cord issue that sometimes flares its little head, you can clear out a room when you go start coughing in it in the middle of the COVID situation, but it's really not been anything related to the cough. Hasn't been anything related to COVID or flu. It's just that kind of a scratch or tickle on my vocal cords that I developed about 2 weeks before COVID shut the world down back in 2020, I started coughing, and you just walk around and people are going to do that when everything else was fine. I have avoided COVID for 3 years. Oh, that might be a good idea. I have avoided that thing for 3 years, and it finally caught up to me. So I'm so glad for Don to be able to step in on short notice like he did, and because I really did miss being here. Was able to be here on Sunday, and if you were here on Sunday, I'm sorry. You heard me croak my way through the sermon. I started listening to it when I got back home sometime Sunday afternoon, and at least I did realize that my throat got better as the sermon got longer. So if I had just preached 20 more minutes, it'd been fine. But when I started out Sunday, I was croaking my way through that sermon. So I appreciate those who put up with this with me on that on Sunday. As we get started tonight, our newsletter I did publish this today on Facebook, so it is there for you if you have not gotten it. Plus, if you need a paper copy, there was one on the table to your left as you exit tonight. There's an article about what the kids helping us out on Sunday in the greeting and the ushering and the praise and worship, and they did a great job. They're beginning to get where they're freeing up a little bit, and you see a little bit more expression and not so much like deers in the headlight when they're up here singing. So they did a really good job. But this week, because I was sick this past weekend, I did not want to have Aubrey and AJ get that close to me on Sunday. I decided to push them off to this week, and so they will be helping me preach my message this coming Sunday. The last time we did this, AJ had actually written a little bit of his own part and did a really good job. And this time, about 2 weeks ago, Aubrey came to me and she handed me something, and she said, "Is this good?" And I started reading it. Yeah, that's pretty good. I may let them write the rest of my sermons because it's going to be pretty good. So looking forward to that this coming Sunday as we get back into our series on the armor of God. As we get ready to start tonight, is there anything we need to remember in prayer? All right, well, let's have a word of prayer and we'll get open. Lord, thank you so much for this day. Thank you for what you're doing for us in our church and our community. Lord, we thank you for the way that you are keeping your hand upon us and ministering to the needs that we have. And Lord, we thank you for the way that you have worked miracles in the lives of some of the people of our church here in recent weeks. And we just give you the thanks and praise for what you're doing in Jesus' name. Amen. And I hope you guys enjoyed the dinner, those of you who were here, that we had on Sunday. I went back there just to say hello, and I wasn't going to stay because Karen couldn't come, so she was on her, she tested positive about 2 days after I did, so she was on her quarantine. And so I was just going to go back there and say hi and leave, and I'm on my way down the hallway, and somebody stops me and says, no, they're making up to-go box for you. Okay, well, that's nice of them. They made up 6 to-go boxes for us, including 2 full of desserts. Okay, now come on now, I'm trying. But they did. I went back there, and Justin was working on the dessert boxes, and Kathy Roberts was working on some boxes, and somebody else had a hand on the box. It's like, boy, we got a lot of food. I walked in with a bag full of food, so we do appreciate that. I hope those of you who were here had a good time. I think it was also part of we had a little bit of just a quarterly business meeting so the church leaders could share with you what's going on financially in the church. And I had a report that I asked Don to pass out. I think he left it on the table. So just to give you an idea of what's of what's happening in the church on a business sense. They try to do it every 3 months. I think we missed the last one, but we try to do it every 3 months. And so I hope you were able to be a part of that and hear what's going on in the church. I know at least one of the ministries gave a report, and of all the exciting things going on back there. We're going to continue our series on God sightings, and I will tell you now that I have missed a week. The God sighting, the Bible reading, and the Bible study are no longer connected. It was all three. There was a seamless. This week's Bible study connects with what we read, what we're reading this week, and the sightings were to help us. Were connected. They're not connected anymore. So just we'll be doing a little bit off now, and I may try to catch up back. I got a couple more weeks left of this. I'm going to try and catch back up, and before it kind of rolls into the next portion of this Bible study, but I'm not sure I'll be able to, so we may stay behind for a while. But tonight's Bible study I am calling Seba. Seba. And so think about that as we get started. We have been asking you to think about, as you go out into society and go out into your world, ways that you can see God's hand at work one way or another in your life. And I give you some ways to think about it. Any way that you see God's hand at work is fine with me, but I've been giving you some ideas to think about. And this for what should have been last week, the idea was to think like a sheep, to go out in your world and think like a sheep. Where did you get any guidance? How is it that you got guidance or advice or encouragement during the last week? And since it's been a week since I've been here, since the last 2 weeks, can you think of a time out in society somewhere, or even through your Bible study or Bible reading time, but was there times that you, thinking like a sheep, can remember God really helped me, guide me here, or encourage me there, or sent some good advice my way from here? Is there any ways you can think of where you found the shepherd helping you as a sheep? Okay. Okay. All right. That's good. Fred?
Well, during our 3 weeks of thunderstorms, we had some high winds.
Right.
And had roof damage,
Hmm.
water leakage, things blown away, trees falling. And I was very fortunate to find Christian builders,
Nice.
roofers, a personal friend of ours
Mm-hmm.
that does general contracting that we found through this church.
Oh, nice.
And they have been very gracious in helping and coming up with estimates and dealing with the insurance
Yeah.
company.
Okay.
I really believe that that was God's way of helping out.
Sure.
A situation that was just, I really feel bad about Selma,
Mm-hmm.
Titus, and all those people that lost their lives, and that there's nothing you can do, even a tornado going through.
Right. Mm-hmm.
We must be in the southern tornado alley because they come
They are.
frequently.
Yeah.
And but when you're dealing with weather-related
Mhm.
stuff, and you really need God's help,
Right.
whether it's finding a safe place or just God's hand
Yeah.
in just just remember
Mm-hmm.
the Presbyterian Church in Wetumpka.
Mm-hmm.
When that tornado came through, and it was just devastated those homes and that church.
Right.
Yeah, I think that God really had a special hand in putting that church back
Sure.
like it was.
Right. Well, that's neat. Insurance companies refer to those kind of things as acts of God, so they don't have to cover it. But if it's going to be a quote unquote act of God, it's nice to know that God shows up and acts like a shepherd, finding his sheep a place to go or things to do, or in your case, finding some help getting navigating the insurance waters and stuff like that. That's really neat. That's good to hear. Anything else where, as a sheep, you saw God putting kind of taking care of you one way or another? Yeah. Yeah, it was about 3 o'clock in the morning when we realized she started getting sick, and her fever went up to about 102. And the thing that really kind of scared us the most is her heart rate went up to about 140. And that has been a problem since the first time she had COVID and spent 5 days in the hospital. And suddenly she now has to take medicine to keep that heart rate down. She took the medicine and it didn't seem to do no good. But by Saturday morning, it was back to normal, and everything's been good since then. So, so that's neat. Thank you, Karen, for sharing that. Well, have you been able to read any of the passages that we published throughout the week? Again, I'm not doing this day by day to have everybody read the exact same passage on the exact same day, but these passages kind of connect to the God-sighting idea. And so these passages that we would have been reading that week would have been about thinking like a sheep and how God takes care of his sheep. So have you been able to read any of the passages? And if so, have you been able to ask God to tell you something? And has he shown you or told you anything as you've read through the passages that we from week to week? Well, then let me ask you this. Suppose that I was to tell you that I was going to give everyone some dessert this week. That I was going to pass out dessert to everybody in the building. And then I gave you a bowl of whipped cream. Would you be excited? Would you be disappointed? Would getting a bowl of whipped cream when I told you I was going to give you dessert, would that be a positive thing for you or a negative thing for you? What do you think? Is it sweetened whipped cream? All right, that would be one thing. All right, so if I said I got a dessert for everybody tonight, and then when I started passing it out, it's just a bowl of Ready Whip or whatever. What would that mean to you? Would that be a good thing or a bad thing?
Is it low calorie?
Low calorie whipped cream. I can tell you this. For Karen, she would go, yes, please. There were times when we were staying with her dad and stepmom, and usually after each meal, that she had a little bowl of pudding that she would offer everybody, and then they'd go around and put Ready Whip on the pudding. And I don't particularly care. I will eat whipped cream, as I'm not against it, but if I'm eating pudding, I want pudding. I don't want to take up space where pudding ought to be. So I don't usually eat the whipped cream. And everybody else would put whipped cream on theirs, and they put some nuts on theirs, and maybe some chocolate syrup on theirs, or whatever. And Karen would start eating, and she'd eat down her whipped cream, and then she'd get to the pudding and give me the pudding. And so if I were to pass out a bowl of whipped cream and say, this is dessert, Karen would go, thank you very much, and would be very, very happy. Her dad and stepmom would laugh. Every time that she would finish, she would get down right to the top of the pudding. She might have taken off one little millimeter of pudding from the bowl, and then I'd be getting the pudding, and she'd be done. So it is interesting. Sometimes our expectations and our reality don't always match. When we expect something to happen, what we're thinking of doesn't really jive with what we end up getting. A good example of this, my mom and sister live in Kentucky. Now, among other things, Kentucky is just north enough to get snow, but not south enough to have really good really good weather year-round, like some places do. And so they've been up there. My sister's been up there for a number of years. My mom's been up there with her for 8 or 10 now, I guess. I can't remember exactly. It's been a fair long time. They were talking about the other day that they were going to go out and get a Crystal hamburger. Now, I've lived up north of the Mason-Dixon line, and I know good and doggone well you can't find a Crystal up there. Don't even say those two words in the same sentence, please. My goodness, that's exactly right. My mom is years old, and she grew up in Chattanooga, and so Crystal is kind of like, do you want a Coke? Sure. What kind? Pepsi, Sprite, Dr. Pepper. Everything's a Coke. Well, to my mom, every little hamburger that's square is a Crystal. And I knew she wasn't talking about Crystals. And so they started talking, and yeah, we got a White Castle here. And I said, Mom, you know good, you know better. It's not the same thing. And she went out and she had her little White Castles, and she muddled through. She has to come home because they're not allowed to put mustard on them, so she had to come home and put mustard on her White Castles. And I used to live in St. Louis for a year, and I tried White Castle once, and that was it. I just waited till I would go home to visit Grandma or go home and visit Mom, and I would load up on Crystals. Well, I haven't had a Crystal in a while. Now, for some of you, you know that my second sermon in this building, I had a steamer pack of Crystals on the table with me. Now, fortunately, it was an empty box because I wasn't going to make everybody smell those Crystals. But I am a fair Crystal fan, you might want to say. My cholesterol here recently has been an issue, and at least it's been an issue to my doctor. And the numbers the last time I had my numbers done, they couldn't even count my cholesterol. The numbers were so messed up. And I tried to tell my doctor, I said, you don't understand, I don't have cholesterol. My blood is cholesterol. It's just a whole different thing. When my mom was carrying me, the only food she could keep down were Crystals. And so I have come by Crystal in a legitimate fashion. I remember when Karen and I moved to McDonough, Georgia, which is just south of Atlanta. We had gone up in March and to find a house, and then we had come back went back to Florida to get our stuff and come back. Well, when we were there in March, there was no Crystal in that town because it had been shut down. They were renovating the building. Well, by the time we get back in April, they have already finished the renovations, and they've had their grand opening, and they had a Crystal eating contest, and they had this big poster on the wall commemorating the Crystal eating contest and how proud they were and how much fun everybody had and how the winning person ate 35 Crystals in 4 minutes. And I read that poster, and I laughed out loud. I couldn't help. I didn't mean to. I didn't want to make them feel bad. But I turned to Karen and I said, "The winner of this contest only ate 35 Crystals, and it took them 4 minutes." I mean, I can breathe 35 Crystals faster than that. So the other day, Karen and I went to. We were doing our banking. We had to go to Prattville for that, and so because Karen was on quarantine, she couldn't go in to eat. We usually go to Jim and Nick's, or there's a little Chinese buffet that we like to go to, but we couldn't go anywhere because she was on quarantine. So I made sad puppy eyes at her, and she said, "Okay, go to Crystals." So we went and we got some Crystals, and we got 12, and she ate 3, and I ate 9, and somehow they gave us 2 extra, so I ended up eating more than that. It did not make it back. The Crystals didn't even get halfway back from Prattville to here. I mean, they didn't even make it barely out of Otago County, which is just down the road. So I can come by this stuff fast, and I can eat these kind of things pretty quick. And so when my mom was telling me about wanting to get a Crystal, and so they went out to get a White Castle, that would be real disappointing to me because I would have an expectation of something that I would not get anything close to matching my expectation if I was having to go and get a White Castle. Now, for those of you who are watching me from someplace and that's all you got, I am sorry, it's a desert land, but God will take care of you if you pray hard enough. But my point is that the expectation of one thing and you get something entirely different. If somebody were to say, I've got a great big steak I'm going to grill up for you. Why don't y'all come over for dinner tomorrow night and with steak and potatoes, and we'll have all the stuff. And I get over there, and it's a tofu steak. I'm a preacher, so I'm not going to say anything, but I guarantee you that I'm going to think twice before I take your invitation to come back to your house for steaks. Okay? If you invite me for hamburgers and I find out it's an Impossible Burger, I am not going to be a happy camper, because my expectation is this, and this does not match it. So if I offered you a bowl full of whipped cream after I had told you I was going to bring dessert for everybody, most of us would probably go, that you didn't reach my expectation. Karen would be happy, the rest of us probably would not be. So I'm going to ask you this question. If you were writing a book about your life and about your relationship with God, and each week is a new chapter in your book, what would the title of last week's chapter be? What would be the main focus of the chapter of your book for your life, your life and your relationship with God over the last, let's make it, since I was gone a week, let's make it 14 days. What would the chapter and the focus, the title and the focus be of a book chapter about your life this past 8 to 10, 12 days? God give you strength. All right. Want to elaborate, or are you just going to answer the question and move on? Yeah. Okay. Sure. So this was a week of relying on the Lord. All right. What else, who else would want to answer? What would the title of this week be in your book? What would if the book was about your life and your relationship with God, and each week was a new chapter? What would the title be for this chapter? Patience. Well, yeah, dealing with all the storm damage and the insurance and the contractors, I can understand that. Patience. Okay, having gone through your second battle of COVID, he did it again. I like that. That's a good title for a week's worth of life and relationship with God. He did it again. So I want you to think about this. I want you to take 60 seconds, and I want you to think about your relationship with God. I want you to think about, has He revealed anything to you this week? And you can jot down anything you want to jot down on the back of your notes. I'm not going to ask you to answer that out loud. I will, if you want to, I will definitely welcome your responses. But just take 60 seconds. I'm going to get quiet. I'm not going to say anything for that 60 seconds. And I want you to think about your relationship with God and what He may have revealed to you. And again, let's make it 2 weeks since it's been 2 weeks since we did this Bible study. What has He revealed to you over the last 2 weeks about your relationship with Him? So 60 seconds and think about that. Would anybody want to share what you've thought about over the last 60 seconds in your relationship with God, or what God has revealed to you about your relationship with Him over the last week or so? Okay?
I'm going to say, since we've been talking
Mm-hmm.
And because since I'm retired, I spend a lot of time looking at TV and the news and reading, you know, the Democrats against the Republicans and vice versa.
Right.
And that all of these people that I don't think, if they have a belt, is certainly not the belt of truth.
Right. Okay.
You know, and then, or you hear things over and over and over again, and you realize, how can people sit there and listen to what they suspect, or some even know,
Mm-hmm.
that are lies,
Right.
and still believe what they say?
Wow. Okay.
And I think that our country is at a crossroads, and I think it's a lack of education that they can listen to this and know what they feel is the truth,
Mm-hmm.
but allow politicians to sway their thinking.
Sure. Okay.
That's what I've been thinking.
So thinking about a lot about the belt of truth and how it's kind of hard to see any evidence of that when you look in our society or culture or politics. Yeah. Okay. I can definitely agree and understand that. Anybody else have a thought about what God has shown you about your relationship with Him over the past week or so? Okay. Mm-hmm. Nice. Okay. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. Nice. Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, you're actually kind of answering the second question I was going to ask here, which was, now that God has shown something to you about what He's revealed to you about your relationship with Him in the last week or so, I was going to ask us to take a couple minutes and then ask Him, all right, now that you've shown me something about my relationship with you, Lord, what do I do about it? How do I respond to what you show me, which is what you were beginning to talk about there, was how you've responded. So if the Lord has shown you something here, and even just now or other times throughout the week, shown something to you about your relationship with Him, He wouldn't just show it to you for the sake of information. This book does not exist to give us a bunch of facts. It exists to change our life. It exists to help us figure out what we are doing wrong and how to do it right. So if God has revealed something to you about your relationship with Him, whether it's a positive or maybe even a little bit of a negative about your relationship with Him, what does He want you? Because sometimes we go, well, God's told me that, but I don't know what to do about it. The good news is you don't have to know what to do about it. You can ask God what to do about it. The same God who has revealed to you whatever issues, good or bad, may exist in your relationship with Him is the same God who will show you what to do with it. So let's take a couple minutes and just think about what God has revealed to you about your relationship with Him over the last week or two, and then ask Him if there's some things that you need to do specifically to respond to whatever it is you've heard. So just take a minute or so and think about that, and then we'll move on. And for this one, I'll lead off because this kind of goes into something I said on Sunday. And it's something that I have dealt with as a minister for 20 years. There are times I think that I was closer to God before I went into the ministry than I have been as a minister. And the reason for that is almost every time, if I'm not careful, almost every time I pick this book up, is to study, to prepare something. And that's not a bad thing, and it's something and you can learn a lot by teaching others, and so there's value to that. But lots of pastors, lots of ministers get into the trap of everything that we do when we're praying or when we're reading or when we're studying has a purpose. It is to do something, to plan something, to prepare something. And what happens is, to get filled up gets left to the side. And so I know that when I talk to God about my relationship with Him, I hear more often than not that I've got to be sure that I'm taking time, that I read this Bible and that for no other reason than to hear from God. And no other reason than to let Him speak to me in a personal way that I may not ever preach. And that's the hard thing, because you have 52 sermons a year you got to prepare, 52 Bible studies. Some preachers, they do two sermons on Sunday, and you've got all this material you've got to prepare. It's hard to just let something be God helping you personally. Your mind is always going, now how can I make a sermon out of this? How can I make a lesson out of this? How can I make a devotional out of this? How can I write a newsletter article out of this? And I think that in my response, what God would want me to do is be sure that I am, and I mentioned a little bit on Sunday about it's easy to get to a point where you're doing so much, but you're doing a whole bunch of good things, but you're missing the best thing. And I think in my case, this would be it, that I've got to be sure that when I am praying and studying, that sometimes when I open that Bible, it is not with any intent to ever preach anything that I see. That it's to let the Lord speak to me personally. Now, He may decide to use it in the future, but I can't go in there with my mind thinking, okay, now I got to go write this down because I'm going to forget this idea. And I think that's where my response to God wanting to talk to me about my relationship would be. Nobody else has to share anything that personal if you don't want to, but is there anything you would like to share about what God would want you to do in response to what He has shown you about your relationship with Him? All right, in your notes, you're going to see a little chart. And this chart has four categories: appetizer, main course, dessert, and snack. And what I want us to think about in terms of our life and the things that we need or want in our life, the things in our life that that we need or want, and I want us to try and think about how they would fit under each of these categories. For example, you could place God under all four categories. Obviously, our relationship with God should be our appetizer, our main course, our dessert, and our snack. I mean, so we need that kind of filling up. You know, I think I mentioned this on Sunday. If you eat really well on Sunday and you eat pretty decent on Wednesday, but then you don't ever eat another single thing all week, eventually you're going to be very unhealthy. And spiritually, we have the same problem. Sometimes we eat only on Sundays and we eat only on Wednesdays and we don't eat any other time, and our spiritual health suffers because of that. But so we could have God, 4 times a day as a snack, as an appetizer, as a main course, or as a dessert. But think about some of the other things you think you need in your life. Where would you categorize specific needs? Are they interesting things that you probably is going to make your life better or is going to make things better? And if you go to a meal that has a 4-course design to it and you get an appetizer, whether it's a salad or a soup or something else, that thing is the purpose of it is to get your appetite whetted so you'll be hungry for the next course. That's what the whole purpose of an appetizer is to get you to want to eat more and have that next thing come out. So it's not necessarily you couldn't live on appetizers, but they're good and they serve a purpose and in the course of in the context of the whole meal. And so what would be some needs that you have in your life that really are important, but they don't rise to the level of being, if I don't get this, things are not going to go right. Now, I gave an example in your notes, new carpet in the living room. That's probably important, especially if your carpet's 40 years old. It may, if it's threadbare, if you've had a lot of dogs and cats over the last several years, it's probably not a bad idea to get new carpet in the living room. So it's something that is important, and it kind of sets the stage for everything else in your life, but it doesn't really rise to the level of being the main thing I need. What would be a main thing that I need? A job. That would probably be one of those things that would rank as a main course, a job. But how about a new television set? Nobody needs a new television set. Even if you don't have a television set that works, you don't need one because you can do a lot of watching television on this thing. But even then, if you're watching TV 5 hours a day and your TV breaks and you're suddenly not watching it at all, I think you're better off. And so we don't need a new TV, but it's fun to have. It's nice to have. It's something that can be beneficial. And so we might call that like a dessert. Nobody needs chocolate pie, but I'll take it if you got it. That's perfectly fine. And it fits in course of the meal, especially if I've had a good meal up to that point. Well, what would be something that is really not something that is terribly important in your life? And I wrote fun and laughter here, and I don't really think that fits. But what would be something that it would come as something that you can enjoy, but it really doesn't affect the quality of the rest of your life? That would be something you would put under a snack. So, excuse me. So I want you to think about the things that you would qualify as needs in your life right now. How would you arrange them on that chart? And if you have a pen or pencil, go ahead and do that a little bit. If you're working on needing contractors and insurance and clearing this and that, some things are way more important than others. So where does that fit in the need? This is the need. Is it the number 1 need of your life, or is it a number 3 need, or is it a number 2 need, or whatever the case? So just think about that for a second. I'm not going to ask you to share that with us. This is for your own personal benefit. So I'm not going to ask you to share that with us. But what happens is we either do one of two extremes. We get wants and needs so intermingled and so confused with each other that we don't understand the difference between a need and a want. Or we are so consumed that God really wants to provide all of our needs that we shouldn't have any wants. No, that's bad. We just let God deal with our needs. We don't, and so there's a balance there's nothing wrong with needs or having a need or having a want. There's not anything wrong with wanting something, but how we approach it is the difference. So think about the things in your life that you would classify as a need or maybe even a want, and what category would you put that in? And then think about this question: how are needs and wants similar, and how are needs and wants different? How are needs and wants similar, and how are needs and wants different? All right, now you've had a chance to think about the four courses there: the appetizer course, main course, dessert, and snack. Let's go on to that question. How are wants and needs similar, and how are wants and needs different? How would you, and we may all define that differently because it's a personal matter, so it all may be different for each one of us. But how would we see wants and needs as different or similar? Okay, a need is something required for me to survive. I like that's a good definition. I like that. Okay, a want is then something that is not required for survival, but it would make survival a lot more comfortable. Okay, I like that. That's a great definition. I'm going to have to go back and watch the video so I can write that down and steal it for the next time I preach this. So, because I like those two definitions. And so, what do you think? What are the similarities or differences between wants and needs? Okay. Right. Okay. 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 Sure. Okay. I like the analogy of food there. You have to have food to survive, and so that's a need. And sometimes you want a little bit more fluffy food. Something that's going to speak to your taste buds and is going to make you feel good or make you feel fulfilled or satisfied in one way or another. That's good. It's interesting if you look at Psalm 23. In the ERV, which is the version I like to read, it says this: "The Lord is my shepherd, I will always have everything I need." In the King James, of course, we know how the King James reads it: "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Now, the problem when we read that is if we read the King James Version with our 21st century mindset, want has a whole different meaning. Want, in our way of looking at it, is like you and Wayne have both said, it is something that is a part of what's required, but it's maybe an option or something, or our preference on something that, beyond the basic requirement. But that's not the way the word want is used in King James type language. We read this and we read it with our mindset and we go, well, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And that can lead us to thinking, well, that means God will give us everything we want. I don't have any problem saying that God may give us everything we want. At some point in time, I can guarantee you I'm getting every single thing I've ever wanted in my life I'm going to get. Now, I may be there when it happens. We have to be sure that we understand that the difference between a want and a need on our level. But God has a little different way of looking at it. But if we look at this scripture and we use that word want from the King James as and see it only in terms of selfish desire, which is why many people see the word want, well, that's certainly not what God is saying. He is not saying, I am your shepherd, I will give you every selfish desire, because he tells us all over the place to desire him and not be selfish. And so we have to look in the context of the rest of the Bible. But if you look at the way the ERV renders it, the Lord is my shepherd, I will always have everything I need. Now that leaves you with a great deal of flexibility. I need food. I want a steak. Neither one of those statements are wrong. And neither one of those statements are unbiblical. Neither one of those statements is going to be God looking down and going, well, you just have your priorities all messed up. Because they're both speaking to the basic need, I need something to eat. Well, there's nothing wrong with having a preference. I need something to eat, and if you give me a choice between fish and steak, I am never going to pick fish because I don't like it. Okay? I am going to pick steak, but if you bring me to your house and you're serving and you have spent all day working on, salmon almondine or something, a salmon almondine, I'm going to eat it. Well, because I remember my mama saying, one bite of everything, one spoonful of everything, don't you complain. Because I need to eat something. But if I have a choice, I am not eating fish. I don't know how I spent 15 years of my life in Central Florida and don't like fish, but I don't. But there's a difference between a need and a want, but there's nothing wrong with a want if you don't see want as a selfish desire. Want can sometimes just be a personal preference, which there's nothing really wrong with a personal preference. If you look at Psalms 23, especially if you compare a modern version to the King James, it sometimes can give you a different twist on what these verses might actually mean. And so I'm going to encourage you to do that as a little bit of homework, to get an idea of read the 23rd Psalm, and if you go to a place like BibleGateway.com, you can pull up two versions at one time. And so you could have the King James, and you could have the ERV, or you could have the Message, or you could have the Voice, or you could have the NIV, or whatever. And you could see verse by verse by verse how different translators at different times have rendered these phrases in Psalm 23. It gives us a little bit richer, more full understanding. I don't have time to go through and do that today, but I just wanted to throw that out for you. The rest of your notes talks about the responsibilities of a shepherd, and we're supposed to be thinking like a sheep. And the idea that if God is our shepherd, that means we are the sheep, and we need to think like a sheep. And so I wrote down these ideas of what a shepherd does from the shepherd perspective, but we need to look at them from the sheep perspective. A responsibility of the shepherd is to guard the flock. Well, what's that mean to me as a sheep? What's that mean to me as a sheep if my shepherd is guarding the flock? Thieves, wild animals, etc. Sometimes, and sheep sometimes just like to wander. That's why they have to have a shepherd, because they'll wander around and they'll wander off. And that means that a shepherd must actively keep his sheep from harm. But as a sheep, if I'm thinking like a sheep, do I always realize that my shepherd's keeping me safe? Or sometimes do I think my shepherd's just not letting me have no fun? And so we've got to be sure that as sheep, we don't think so much as a sheep that we don't realize what the shepherd is really trying to do for us. A responsibility of the shepherd is to count the sheep. Why would a shepherd count the sheep? Yeah, Jesus said a man has 100 sheep and loses one. How's he know? Only if he counts them. And so the way they used to count it is very easy. A gate into a fold wasn't like we would know, a gate where you can swing open. It was just basically a hole. And the shepherd would fill the hole himself at night. He'd sleep in it. And that's how he would keep the sheep from leaving the fold and keep the wolves from coming into the fold, is because he's sitting in the gate. But when they come in, they just basically would put their hand out, and one little sheep, every time they pass under the hand, 2 little sheep, 3 little sheep, 4 little. That way he knew if one was missing and knew where he needed to go out and run. Because how would you know if you have 100 sheep and 99 are in the fold and one's missing if you haven't counted? But thinking as a sheep, doesn't that sometimes seem a little restrictive? Like, why does he care, how many sheep there are? I'm not, you should just be thinking, about finding me some water or finding me some food somewhere. And so we need to be sure that we're thinking along, even though we're sheep, we need to be sure we understand what the shepherd is trying to do. A shepherd goes out looking for missing sheep. If you have been attending this church for any length of time at all, and you've missed a Sunday, it is most likely you've received the text sometime Sunday afternoon. You guys didn't, because I wasn't sure you weren't here, because I didn't see anybody on Sunday. I was sticking to my office trying to be sure that I didn't breathe on anybody. Well, the whole reason that we send a text out on Sunday afternoon is sometimes it's a text, and then sometimes Karen will follow up with a card. Sometimes the rest later in the week, or a phone call later in the week. And the whole purpose of doing that is not because we're wanting to check up on you and make you feel bad for not being here. I'm wanting to check up on you to be sure the wolf hadn't got you. That something hasn't happened to you that I need to know as a shepherd, that I need to be aware of. I don't want to lose any of the sheep under my care. And I think it was part of my notes that I left for people to read on Sunday is that is the idea of people sometimes falling through the cracks. Well, as a shepherd, I don't want any of my sheep to fall through a crack. But if you're just thinking as a sheep, it could be you get that text on Sunday afternoon and go, will he just leave me alone? I felt like I slept in. Goodness gracious. Okay, well, I'm glad you slept in. Wonderful. If I could sleep in on Sundays sometimes, trust me, I would sleep in. I'm not worried about that. But I want to be sure that you didn't sleep in 8, 9, 10, 12, 11, 15, 20 weeks in a row, and now that becomes a habit, or it's because something has happened to you that I need to know about, that I need to be aware of so that I can possibly help you through it. So thinking as a sheep, I wish he would, man, here it comes. Here it comes, honey. I know that text is coming. There it is. I knew I'd get a text because I'd slept in this morning. That's not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is to be sure you understand we miss you when you're not here. And that we want to be sure. We've got a lot of people in this church who have come through or are part of Celebrate Recovery. For some people that slip through a crack, this means they're going to end up in another church. For other people that slip through a crack might mean they end up in serious problems. And I just don't want to see that happen. That's my job as a shepherd. So we need to think like a sheep, but another thing a shepherd does, he takes care of wounded sheep. He takes care of wounds, even when the wounds sometimes might be the sheep's own doing. As a shepherd's job is to take care of a wound, but how many of you know that sometimes dressing a wound doesn't feel good? And so as a sheep, I may be thinking, why are you messing with my paw? Leave me alone. When when our dog has issues, has stuck something in her paw or has something in her ear and she's shaking her head all the time, and we're trying to fix that. She doesn't particularly like it until after we're done. And then suddenly she starts dancing around like a little puppy again because whatever was hurting her is not hurting her anymore. But when she thinks we're about to go do something to her, she will run and hide, and we will have to grab her. And if we're going to put a little medicine in her ear, I have to kind of fool her. When we think like a sheep, we don't understand, what's he doing this? Why is the shepherd doing this to me? But the shepherd may be seeing something we don't see that needs to be dealt with, and so he's dealing with it. And so that's why I put that list in there for you, is to have us an idea of what a shepherd's role is supposed to be. And then if we think like a sheep, how do we see those things occurring? And how can we then maybe realize that the shepherd isn't doing some of the things we think he might be doing? Sometimes God, really, Lord, really? Why did I have to do that? Why did I have to go through that? The answer is almost always going to be, God, you didn't read this. God doesn't want to teach us anything the hard way. He wants us to learn everything the easy way, or he wouldn't have done it. He wouldn't have written this. But there are times when we just are hard-headed little sheep, and we will only learn it the hard way. And we just need to be sure that we understand that when we think like a sheep, we don't always see what the shepherd is trying to do. And if we can begin to think a little bit like a shepherd, it might make it a little bit easier to be a sheep. Any thoughts or questions or comments before I'm a little bit, only about 2/3 done with my notes, but any thoughts or comments before we get ready to close tonight? All right, well, Lord, thank you for this day, and thank you for the opportunity you've given us to study your word. And Lord, we thank you that you are the great shepherd. And Lord, that means we're sheep, and we think like sheep, but sometimes, Lord, we need to see and understand and realize that you've got purposes and plans for things that you're doing that we don't always see. Lord, speak to us this week. Show us something as we're trying to see you and have a God sighting this week, Lord. Show us what we need to see, and Lord, reveal to us something about yourself through the passages that we will read this week. And we thank you so much, Lord, for what you're doing for us in Jesus' name. Amen. The God sighting for this week is serving others. How often will you serve others this week? How will you do that this week? Is it small kindnesses get done to somebody, or small gifts or acts of service? Just keep a record somehow, even if it's just a mental record, of the way that you serve others this week. Because when you serve others, of course, you're serving God. And if you're serving God, God is never going to let your service go unrewarded. So if you're serving others in His name, we want to be aware of that, so we can begin to then say, oh, and God responded this way with me. Oh, I did this for them, and God did this. So think about ways that you can serve others this week, and when you do, think about how that service, how God might be wanting to respond to you through that service. Y'all have a great evening, and I'll look forward to seeing you on Sunday. Thank you guys so much for being here tonight.